Trump said he may or may not join Israel in striking Iran's nuclear and military facilities. Tehran responded almost immediately, warning it will not negotiate under duress, adding any threat will be met with a counter-threat. The Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall told LBC the UK continues to appeal for calm.
It is a very volatile, fast-moving and concerning situation, and all of our focus is on what's in the best interests of British nationals and our national interest, and that is de-escalation. That is why the Prime Minister, in the statement with the G7 and in his conversations with our allies in the region, is entirely focused on that.
The government confirmed the opening of HS2 will be delayed again beyond 2033. The Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander admitted the construction of the rail line is an appalling mess. She says billions of pounds was wasted by the Tories, who have accepted they made some mistakes. Local residents in Birmingham are frustrated.
Anything sort of like a major infrastructure, there's going to be delays.
And who's going to be able to afford it anyway?
I can't see when all the desperate need, homelessness, etc., I really can't see the point.
A British man who was the sole survivor of the Air India crash in Ahmedabad has left hospital. 40-year-old Vishwash Kumar Ramesh has since been seen as a pallbearer at the funeral for his brother, who was killed when the plane came down last Thursday. A grandmother from Barnsley has died from rabies after she was scratched by a puppy while on holiday in Morocco. Yvonne Ford's family said she was unable to walk, talk, sleep or swallow before she died. And a member of the Irish rap group Kneecap is due back in court in August after being granted unconditional bail on terror charges. Liam O'Hanna is accused of displaying a flag in support of Hezbollah at a gig in Kentish Town in November last year. Hundreds of protesters turned out in support of the 27-year-old. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 9 points at 88.43. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.16. LBC weather staying dry and settled tonight for much of the UK. Some patchy light rain for the Western Isles, a low of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm James Kitchen.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
And it's Simon Marks in for Ian Dale all this week and next week, and back in the chair for tonight's edition of Cross Question. We do this on Ian's programme every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. An hour of open-ended conversation where you set the agenda with your questions by phone, text, or you can send them to us over Alexa. Whatever is top of mind for you this evening, we will talk about it in the hour ahead. And joining me around the Cross Question table tonight, Luke Charters, the Labour Member of Parliament for York Outer, the Conservative peer Lord Marland, the party's former treasurer who has held ministerial portfolios at the Department of Energy and the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills, the writer and economist Grace Blakeley, and Emma Revell of the Centre for Policy Studies think tank. You can ask them anything you like. Perhaps you have questions or anxieties tonight about what happens next in Iran and the impacts of the conflict on the UK and British interests around the world. Maybe you'd like to ask about yet another delay to HS2. Perhaps you've got the government's proposed welfare reforms on your mind, or climate change. On the day the Met Office warned there is a 50-50 chance of temperatures in the UK reaching 40 degrees over the next 12 years. Or you can also offer us a proposal for the fun question of the night that we will put to the panel at the end of the hour. On Cross Question, it is your question that sets the agenda, and if the sound of us isn't enough for you, you can watch us as well, live in glorious high definition right now on the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
And let's go to our first question for the panel tonight, and it comes from Tony in Maidstone. Good evening, Tony. What would you like to ask the panel?
Hi, Simon. Hi, panel. My question is, who is the most dangerous at the moment, in your opinion? Is it Iran, or is it President Donald Trump? Or, as I also call him, Dr. Evil from Austin Powers?
Labour MP Luke Charters. Who is more dangerous, Donald Trump or the Ayatollah?
Well, certainly not one of our core allies. What I would say is it's time for restraint. No one is going to benefit from this regional conflict spreading even further. So time for restraint, time for collective action, because no one is going to benefit from a much broader regional conflict.
Are you seeing restraint on the part of President Trump?
That's a matter for the White House. I know that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have called for that. But equally, we've got to be ready for all contingencies, haven't we? And John Healey, the Defence Secretary, I think is right to deploy typhoons to the region on a contingency basis to protect those British assets if necessary. But let's see if we can work to a solution where there isn't a conflagration in the crisis.
But it's clearly not just a matter for the White House, because the Prime Minister, having yesterday said that he was confident that Donald Trump was speaking the language of de-escalation, got back to the UK and immediately called a Cobra meeting.
Well, Simon, as you say, the PM has held a Cobra meeting. We're in an uncertain time, and I think that's why we just had the defence review in Parliament. The PM was absolutely right to increase defence spending at the fastest rate since the 80s, since the end of the Cold War. It's proven that that's necessary, but ultimately it's time for restraint to de-escalate. No one wants to see a broadening of this conflict.
Lord Marland, time for restraint and de-escalation, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of de-escalation out there.
Well, I don't think it's in our hands. I don't think, with all due respect to the leader of the great Labour Party and our Prime Minister, I don't think it's in his hands either. I think Trump has given Israel a proxy to attack a rogue state, which is Iran, a state that is very much in league with Russia, who has been a very destructive state. And it's just a question of how much he extends that proxy and makes the America a powerful the global power, rather than having these aggressors that have eroded the potency. So that's really the scene. And Britain is you're absolutely right to say that we should protect our interests. Of course we should. And that's quite right that typhoons and things like that have been sent to Cyprus. But it won't be in our hands. And in some ways we're very lucky it isn't.
What's your view on what the government should do if the White House calls up and says, we're going to launch those B-2 bombers from Diego Garcia?
Well, I think the government would be very well placed in remembering what happened when we decided to support the US government in Syria. And I was invited in by David Cameron to give my view on whether we should go into Syria, and I said no, because I don't think you'll get the support of the nation. I don't think you'll get the support of most people who understand foreign studies. And just because America are saying, well, you must come with us, it doesn't necessarily mean you should. And I also said you won't get the support of Parliament, which in this particular once in my lifetime, I was correct. And I think those are the conditions that the Prime Minister needs to consider. Will he have the support of the nation? Would he have the support of Parliament, even though he's got a massive majority? And is it in the best interest of the UK? And I don't think a conflict with Iran is necessarily in the best interest of the UK. It's not a country that we have strong relationships with. Of course, it is, as I said earlier, a rogue state. It is associated with Russia, which is a very bad state. And we should wait and see what the big boys want to do about it.
The rogue state here that hasn't been mentioned is, of course, Israel, which has repeatedly broken international law, is committing genocide in Gaza, and knows exactly what it's doing in trying to ignite a regional conflagration here, in trying to tempt its major allies and defenders, the US and the UK, into a conflict. And we would be absolutely mad to fall for it. People are sick of following politicians in the pockets of arms manufacturers into unwinnable wars in the Middle East, lest we forget Iraq, when we were again tempted into a conflict on the basis of complete and utter nonsense about weapons of mass destruction, only to kill tens of thousands of people, destroy the foundations of a state, and pave the way for the emergence of ISIS. Or going back even further, when the US decided to arm the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, flooded the region with weapons, led to the emergence of the Taliban. So they go in to fight the Taliban only 10 years later to hand power back to the Taliban. We have learned time and time again that we should not be sucked in to these conflicts, despite the rhetoric of politicians who want to realistically warmonger for their own ends.
So, Grace Blakeley, is your answer to Tony's question, who is more dangerous, Trump or the Ayatollah, Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yes. At this point in time, if you think about who is the leader right now that is responsible for creating the nation with the largest number of child amputees in the world, the largest number of journalists that have been killed in a conflict in God knows how long? This is an incredibly, incredibly dangerous man, and it is sickening that we are supporting him.
I think Grace, sorry to interrupt, I think Grace has got a very good point. And the fact is, recent history would dictate that when the US have gone into an invaded country, it's been a failure. And many people said, we going into Libya was a failure, which was partly true. But, the US has a history of going into a country and failing to deliver a future for that country.
OK, want to get to Emma Revell.
I think, the difficulty, going back to the original question, is that the Ayatollah is innately dangerous to most of the West. A nuclear-armed Iran is in no one's interests other than Iran, and as Lord Marland says, probably Russia. Donald Trump's danger, if that's the right word, is that he is probably the most unpredictable US president that we've seen in our lifetimes, if not possibly ever. And when he comes out with very public statements saying, like, I may bomb Iran, I may not bomb Iran, that's not helpful to anybody. He is likely to turn on a sixpence and just make impulsive decisions, which for a leader with the global and nuclear and military power that Donald Trump has at his disposal is incredibly dangerous. I don't think it's at the same level as nuclear Iran, and I understand why Israel particularly feels very threatened by the idea of a nuclear Iran. I agree that Israel is accelerating this somewhat, although you could argue there is a preemptive element to that, but certainly that's what they would argue. But, going back to the question, I don't think you can say Donald Trump is more dangerous right now than Iran, but the unpredictability is certainly going to be putting a lot of discomfort on for world leaders.
OK, I want to go to our next question because it's a follow-up to Tony's question, and this comes from Mike in Finchley. Mike, good evening. What's your question for the panel?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. By the way, I'm really disappointed by the comments from one of your panelists about Israel, being so critical. Okay. Really unfair. But anyway.
Go ahead, though, Mike. Let's hear your question for the panel tonight.
Okay, so my question is this. Given the murderous bullies of the Iranian regime and the likes of boy bands displaying terrorist flags supported by thousands of hate-filled supporters against the West, has our government not learned from the lessons of history with the naivety of Chamberlain and instead the strength against these bullies of the likes of Churchill? Has our government not learned?
Are you comparing Iran to Nazi Germany?
Yes, I am most definitely comparing.
Interesting.
Not Iran.
Historical
by the way,
revisionism.
not Iran. Excuse me. Not Iran. I'm comparing the regime, the Nazi-like regime of Iran, not the Iranian people. It's the regime of Iran, and the regime and how they spread their evil to other groups in the whole Middle Eastern.
And you think that they're as bad as the Nazis?
I want to go to Luke Charters though, because Luke, the question that Mike is asking is whether Labour wants to emulate Neville Chamberlain or Winston Churchill.
I think the lesson we have to draw from sort of Chamberlain in the 1930s era was that deterrence failed, and I think we've had armed forces in this country that have been depleted for far too long, and that's why the government's investing in the nuclear deterrent, billions extra there. I've been up to see some of the dreadnoughts being built. We've also got to invest in the conventional deterrence, because if we deter the next war, as Chamberlain failed, then we will prevent the next one from taking place. But with respect to Iran, diplomatic efforts have to continue so that Iran doesn't get hold of a nuclear weapon, and the government has been robust, I think, with some of the Iranian sanctions against the regime that they've applied.
Emma?
I think Luke is right in one regard. We do need to up our armed forces. They have been underinvested in. I think one of the weaknesses of a percentage of GDP target is that you end up sort of fiddling with the books. I think what the Labour government has done recently possibly not for the first time, is to include sort of intelligence spending as part of the defence spending budget. So you can say, oh, we're spending 2.5%.
Well, it's a record investment, to be fair, isn't it? I mean, let's have a bit of
I'm not saying investing in intelligence services is a bad thing by any means, but being able to say, oh, well, we've increased investment in defence when you've just moved something from budget column A to budget column B is not the same as investing in defence. We also need to invest in traditional defence, but we also need to invest in modern deterrence. I think the concern is we will equip the British Armed Forces for conflicts of the 1980s and prior, when actually we're not fighting a war then. We're fighting a war in the 21st century. In 2025, we need drones and technological solutions as well as more soldiers.
Grace, Churchill or Chamberlain?
Well, I think at this rate, Keir Starmer is much more likely to end up like Tony Blair. That's clearly who he models himself on. And if he is going to insist on really kind of playing up hostilities in the Middle East. I don't think that we will end up in the same sort of situation that we did with Iraq, but there's the same playbook there as, if you resist calls for intervention in another country. Back then it was, oh, you love Saddam Hussein. Now it's, oh, you're defending Iran. It's, absurd rhetoric. And the only people that really benefit from this intense increase in hostilities that we're seeing all around the world are the weapons manufacturers, who, by the way, have seen their shares increased astronomically since we saw this NATO rearmament taking place.
How is he playing it up? All he said constantly in Canada was it's got to be all about de-escalation, 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 even as Donald Trump was clearly escalating.
And yet his actions suggest that he is preparing to do what he feels he needs to do, basically to try and answer the concerns of the gentleman like the one who just called, who says, don't be like Chamberlain, because this is like World War II. It's not like World War II. It's much more like what happened with Iraq. It's much more like all of the just horrendous, just failed interventions that we have tried to undertake over the last several years in states that we have no business intervening in.
Jonathan Marland.
Well, I was chairman of the International Churchill Society, so I suppose I declare my interest immediately. So apologies if those Chamberlainites listening. Obviously, Churchill was a great man, but this is a totally different situation, as Grace has alluded to and the other panellists have alluded to. This is not a world war. Britain is not being attacked. When Britain is attacked, and if it is attacked, then obviously we hope that the Prime Minister, and in fact the Prime Minister, will be encouraged to be like Churchill, because the nation will want him to be. What the nation does not want, as I said earlier, is us to be fighting, sending our troops into a place where, as Grace says and other panellists say, where we have no sovereign interests, no real interests at all, and they are a rogue state. We just don't need that at this time of economic crisis. And for all the talk about increasing defence spending, defence, as you said earlier, is a long-term thing. A lot of things the Conservatives did, a lot of things the Blairite government did under my friend John Reid. These are all things that have been happening. Submarines don't just happen like that. They've been starting to be built for a long time. And it's right that there should be cross-party endeavour with it. And the only failure of our defence system is the civil service, which has failed abysmally in the procurement process of it. And that's why we are pretty moribund and redundant in terms of our defensive capabilities.
All right, it's been a lively start. We've got plenty more time left for you to get your questions to tonight's cross-question panel here on LBC. You can call 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, or you can ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. The time is now 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Simon Marks in for Ian Dale, helming the Wednesday edition of Cross Question, and our guests tonight are Luke Charters, the Labour Member of Parliament for York Outer, the Conservative peer Lord Jonathan Marland, the writer and economist Grace Blakeley, and I meant to mention at the beginning of the programme she is the author of the book Vulture Capitalism, and Emma Revell, the External Affairs Director of the Centre for Policy Studies think tank. Our next question tonight for the panel comes from Joanne in South Shields. Good evening, Joanne. What's your question?
Good evening, panel. Great show. My question is a former Labour voter and a disabled person is, in campaigning, Keir Starmer spoke a lot about those with the broadest shoulders. Tell me, who has the broadest shoulders? A, disabled people, or B, non-dom millionaires?
And just a reminder to everybody that Keir Starmer said last August, when he was referring to the government's clampdown on non-doms, that those with the broadest shoulders should bear the heavier burden. Disabled people or non-doms, Luke Charters?
Well, of course, we're bringing in new rules for the non-dom tax regime, but we need a welfare system that works for those that want to try work, that haven't been able to, but actually for those who are severe and ill with a long, life-lasting condition. We need to take them out of the reassessment process. We're going to create a new version of universal credit to top up their income. So we need a pragmatic and balanced welfare state to support those who need support.
What do you say to Joanne? She's a former Labour voter. How are you going to win her back?
Well, I hope you'll see what we're trying to do. For instance, we're increasing the basic rate of universal credit. We're taking people out of reassessment. And just today, the OBR has put out that 9 in 10 people will not have their PIP situation changed. This is about creating a sustainable welfare system that puts in more support to give work a go if they would like to.
Joanne, I'm going to get to the rest of the panel in a moment, but does anything that Luke Charters, as a Labour Member of Parliament, anything that he's just said, does it answer your question?
Smoke and mirrors. No, as someone who has appealed the process, I have a lifelong limiting illness that will eventually become terminal. My consultant last week hurriedly typed up a letter for my now new job coach to tell them I will never get better. There is no treatment. It will kill me. Now, a nurse, this is a former nurse who did my last PIP assessment, no points, and bankrupted me. I have very little faith. It's smoke and mirrors, semantics and clever wording. We may have funny limbs and things that are wrong with us, but for a lot of us, our brains work fine. So I do not trust them at all.
So smoke and mirrors, says Joanne.
I'm heartbroken to hear that you've got a terminal illness, Joanne. I'm sure all panellists, we wish you all the very best. And what I would just say is, of course, this is about protecting those that need protecting, and for those with a severe and lifelong illness and, of course, a terminal condition, PIP would be protected, and that is on the face of the bill. So my heart goes out to you for your situation, but it's precisely that sort of story that is protected, and there are new protections on the face of this change.
Grace Blakeley, your answer to Joanne's question is the Prime Minister's interpretation of broader shoulders the same as yours. She's disabled and feeling very disappointed.
I was reading a piece in the FT on this story, and they quoted a senior city financier who says that he regularly sits down and has conversations with Rachel Reeves, who said he was confident that the non-dom change that Rachel Reeves introduced to close the non-dom tax loophole would be amended. Basically, she's going to U-turn on that and provide a big giveaway for wealthy people, backtracking on what she'd promised, just like she backtracked over the promise to properly tax the profits of private equity. And I think what's clear from that is that there is a certain constituency in this country that has the ear of this government. They can get meetings with Rachel Reeves, they can get meetings with Keir Starmer, they can say, we're not sure about this policy, we'd quite like you to do that. And there are lots of other people, like Joanne, who have absolutely no chance of being able to tell politicians what is going wrong in their lives. And there are millions of them who are struggling and suffering every day with chronic illness, with being unable to work, with not earning enough money, sometimes being stretched to the limit from overwork. The social fabric that has tied us together has been torn so thin as a result of austerity. People need support, and the Labour Party is the party that is supposed to be providing that support from them, and they have strayed so far from that moniker of being a party for workers.
Lord Marland, now you are out of government, watching this...
Have been for a long time, actually.
Watching this debate play out. Now the Conservative Party is out of government, watching this debate play out and watching former Labour voters asking that question. How do you view what is now currently taking place?
Well, I let me first of all deal with Joanne's question. I mean, the duty of government, and Craig has alluded to it, is to support those people who need support. And Joanne is, top of that list, isn't she? And so it is wrong if steps are taken to withdraw support from someone like that. And we wish Joanne all the best. To me, the relationship with non-DOMs is not a fair one. If the Labour Party keep taxing people, we'll have a load of non-DOMs, and there'll be British people who are going to live in other countries, which they're already doing. Monaco has a waiting list of 25,000, of which there are 10,000 British people waiting to get in. These are not non-DOMs, these are British business people who are going to leave this country if the tax squeeze goes on any further. I don't want to... I think the correlation between the two is wrong. Ultimately, it's about what the government does with its spending. And key spending is supporting people who need support. Absolutely number one in a government tenet. And from then on, you spend your money in other areas. The problem with government at the moment is the massive wastage. Huge wastage, huge lack of spending. And I think I'm glad to see the Labour government are starting to get a hold of some of that, particularly in the National Health Service. 3 hospitals, by the way, had a computer system put in. 3 London hospitals had a computer system put in of £430 million for a computer system. There's huge wastage. And I'm glad to see Wes Treating is getting a grips of those sort of things. And these things will flow through so that more money can be given to those people who deserve it and need it.
Emma Revell.
I think underlying this question is what's coming up with Liz Kendall's proposed changes to welfare, which are aiming to save, I think, between 4 and 5 billion by 2029, 2030. But the welfare, the disability and incapacity element of welfare is projected to rise 47% in that time. It will go up to £97 billion, up from 60-some billion pounds today. That is clearly unsustainable. That is something that needs changing. When we get into conversations about welfare, we rightly hear from people like Joanne, who the system has not worked for, and we should be doing everything we can to improve the system so that people with conditions like Joanne's don't have to go through repeated assessments and things like that. But at the same time, we cannot let emotive stories shut down any concept of welfare reform or any concept of change to the system, because if we are about to see a £30 billion increase in the cost of welfare and disability in Britain, that's not only bad for paying for that benefit, the economy can't really afford that right now. That's a significant increase in the number of people who are not working, some of whom cannot work and should be supported, but many of whom probably can work in some form or another and do want to work, but the system is currently trapping them in welfare dependency.
Well, let me put to all of you a follow-up question that has come in from Nikki in Tunbridge Wells, and she asks, off the back of that very issue, why are so many people in the UK claiming benefits for ill health, especially compared to other European countries? What is causing this, and can the country afford it? This, she says, has led to record numbers of people being out of work due to ill health, driving up the welfare bill to an unsustainable level, to which you say...
Well, it's incredibly complex. There are lots of different elements to types of reasons why people could be out of work for ill health. The biggest jump since the pandemic has been people on long-term sickness, long-term incapacity as a result of mental health concerns, and they are incredibly valid and need to be addressed. But actually, for a lot of people who do have mental health concerns, actually a life of worklessness and reliance on benefits is not the best solution. They want to work. They're trapped in a system that, unfortunately, does not pay them as well to work as it does to be on benefits. So they're making a completely rational decision, but it's not best for them, their health, or the health of the economy. We need to address the entire system. We need to support people who want to work and are able to work to do so, and bring the cost of welfare down so that the taxpayer benefits.
Luke Charters, how do you get out of that trap that Emma has just
Craig?
Well, I think why have we got so much ill health in this country? We've inherited an NHS absolutely broken to the core. That's why we've invested record amounts in it. If we bring waiting lists down, that will support people get to work. And I think we've already added 3 million extra appointments. And if you look at the month of April, waiting lists are fallen. It's the best month of April waiting list than it has been since Labour was last in power. So if you want to reduce ill health, invest in the NHS. We can't certainly go to what Reform are calling for, a private insurance model. So that's the way we're driving health down in this country.
I'm pretty confident Grace is going to agree that you can't go to a private insurance model.
Certainly not. And it is worth remembering that Nigel Farage, the man of the people, wants to basically get rid of the NHS. But look, I think it's deeper than just the NHS, because the reason that we've ended up in this point is because we are a sick society. People are living with lots of different kinds of chronic illness. Some of that is related to issues around long COVID, but it also relates to very severe, often mental health issues. Bear in mind that we live in a country in which there are more people dying from deaths of despair. That's things like suicide, alcoholism, drug abuse, than we've seen in an extremely long time. And those people are concentrated in the poorest parts of the country. Why? It's not just because we're not investing enough in health. It's because we're not investing in creating the kind of economy that puts people's needs first. It's because we have created a kind of economy in which our politicians see the need to listen to bankers rather than listening to ordinary people. And that's why I think we need a completely different kind of politics. It's why, actually, I'm not supporting Labour. I've recently joined the Green Party.
Wow.
And I think that they have a much better approach to this, which is to understand that we need to prioritise human well-being as well as our relationship with the natural environment, and invest in creating healthy people who are really the foundations of long-term economic growth. If you don't have a healthy population that is willing and able to work because they have Sure Star centres, they have early intervention when their health needs are they have issues with their health, they have interventions when they have issues with their mental health. If you don't prioritise that, then you are not going to build a sustainable economy over the long run. And that is actually why we struggle as an economy with such low levels of productivity as well.
Jonathan Marland, I couldn't tell if you were impressed that Grace has joined the Green Party and forsaken Labour, or if you were dismissive of the concept of the Green Party.
No, I was Minister for Energy and Climate Change. I now call it Minister for Climate Change and Energy because it sounds better when I'm talking to Grace. But,
I'm honoured that you would change it on my account.
You're making change already.
I've also got to apologise to Luke because I called him Craig after my friend Craig Charles. Sorry, Luke.
We've got it all square now.
I'm not going Labour yet. I mean, it is maddening for those of us that work and enjoy working that people don't seem to want to enjoy work and see the benefits of it. And there has got to be a system where we sort this out. It has got, it's a post-COVID disaster, and a lot of people are taking the and it really does need vigilance and determination to sort this out and make it better for people to work. People should be better paid going to work than better paid going to take welfare, and that's the
I kind
answer.
of feel like I'm back in the Victorian times listening to a lord talk about how people don't want to work and that there's the deserving and the undeserving poor, and that we need to force them into the workhouses or whatever it is.
I just told you how marvellous you are. Don't put words in my mouth.
We've got to have a little bit of
I'm not talking about undeserving poor. I wouldn't dream of talking about that. I'm talking about there is, in post-COVID, there has been a desire not to work and to get away with what you can do. That's why people still work from home. And I know a lot of people who work from home and they're not working from home. And so the productivity is reduced. It encourages an environment where people do less. I have a lot of businesses. I employ a lot of people. I know what's going on. And we have to employ people so that they want to go to work, they enjoy the working environment, and that it's to their financial benefit, rather than not working, sitting at home and gaining more money.
The thing that makes people work hard is a sense of autonomy and dignity in their work. And actually a big problem that we have today
a sense of enjoyment and a sense of desire and determination and progressing.
No, it's having a sense of agency too. If people are just sat in front of a computer all day being told exactly what to do like they're a robot, then that's not going to, incentivise them to work hard.
I don't know many people who do that, but that's not how a proper business runs, by the way.
It's how a lot of
I'm going to use my agency.
I don't have a real job. I'm one of the lazy people.
I'm going to use my agency now to say that we have plenty more questions coming on Cross Question tonight. We're going to talk about HS2. We're going to talk about the grooming gangs inquiry, and whatever else is on your mind. You can get your question in front of the panel either by texting it in at 84850, or you can pick up the phone and call us at 0345 6060 973. The time is 26 minutes to 9, and the news headlines come from James Kitchen.
The Prime Minister has chaired an emergency Cobra meeting as tensions continue to rise in the Middle East. Earlier, Donald Trump said he may or may not join Israel in striking Iran's nuclear and military facilities. The government's confirmed the opening of HS2 will be delayed again beyond 2033. The Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander admitted the construction of the rail line is an appalling mess. And a British man who was the sole survivor of the Air India crash in Ahmedabad has left hospital. 40-year-old Vishwash Kumar Ramesh has since been seen as a pallbearer at the funeral for his brother, who was killed when the plane came down last Thursday. LBC weather staying dry and settled tonight for much of the UK. Some patchy light rain for the Western Isles, a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC.
Responders.
Cross Question on LBC.
We're going to get back to your questions in just a second, but news has been occurring, as it is wont to do in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump has been speaking to reporters inside the Oval Office in the last few minutes and has been asked for an update on the Iran situation. Let's see what he said.
They should have made the deal. I had a great deal for them. They should have made that deal. 60 days we talked about it, and in the end they decided not to do it, and now they wish they did it. And they want to meet, but it's a little late to meet, but they want to meet. They want to come to the White House. They'll even come to the White House. So we'll see. I may do that, but it's a shame it could have been done the easy way.
Do you think the regime there could fall?
Sure, anything could happen, right? Of that, sure, that could happen. Yeah.
And then he offered some insight into what he might do next.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change.
I like to make a final decision 1 second before it's due. Let that sink in. While you're doing that, here's our next question for the Cross Question panel. It comes from Tony in Cornwall, who asks, is the nationally humiliating fiasco of HS2, which has outlasted the equally humiliating demise of several prime ministers, a just punishment for our nation's wanton destruction of our natural environment, which has left us as one of the most wildlife-impoverished lands in the world? I want to start with Luke Charters, because Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, basically levelled with the British public today and said that this HS2 situation is catastrophic. Is it, as Tony is suggesting, just punishment for the country's wanton destruction of the natural environment?
Well, today, Transport Secretary finally reset HS2. The cost overruns that we've been seeing under the last Conservative government were absolutely outrageous. But $2 billion wasted, $2 billion that could have gone into hospitals in York or schools in my constituency. $2 billion vanished. And I sit on Public Accounts Committee, and we've been looking very closely at some of these cost overruns on HS2. I asked the boss of HS2, Simon, I said, a very simple question. I said, how much are you spending on nuke mitigation? And they didn't know the answer. They've totally lost control of how they spent money. The reset has happened today. The Transport Secretary is level with the British people and is getting it to grips. I was shocked to learn that Tory ministers didn't even bother to show up to the cost control meetings. That's changed. We're getting to grips with it.
She said today not just getting to grips with it, but she promised to sort it out. Is it at this point worth sorting out? Nigel Farage is saying bin the whole thing.
Well, he wants to waste £2 billion then that's already gone in it. You know, get real. The IFS has already said he can't do maths. 80 billion quid of unfunded commitments from reform, and they want to waste another £2 billion of your listeners' money. It's outrageous. We do need to get on with HS2. We're one of the few nations, advanced nations on the planet that's not building a high-speed rail as quickly and as cheaply as it should have been. Let's get on with it. Let's invest in rail across the country, like Transpennine route upgrades in between York and Manchester, because wasting that £2 billion as a reform would like to, complete jokes.
Emma Revell, there's the aphorism that says when you find yourself in a hole, you should stop digging. Should they stop digging or should they keep on digging, literally?
I think HS2 needs to happen. I think there are a number of, I'm from the north of England, and actually acting the leg to Leeds is one of the biggest things that I've been disappointed on in recent years. The costs have not been managed. I'm not going to say they haven't been managed well. They haven't been managed at all, frankly. And I think it does paint Britain in a terrible but accurate light. We are a bit of a laughingstock. HS2 is emblematic of our failures on infrastructure, our failures on levelling up, our failures on planning and any sort of building. It is ridiculous that it's been 12 years since this railway got the green light. We're no closer to having a train run on it. But I will just say that part of the cost, not in any way the whole cost, but is attributed to the fact that we have been trying to protect the environment as much as possible. Tory MPs who didn't want HS2 running through their lovely green leafy home counties constituencies lobbied for years to get it to go into tunnels or to build tunnels so that their constituents didn't have to look at the trains. That has driven up the costs significantly. So I don't agree with the premise of the question that it's somehow karma for environmental damage.
Grace Blakeley, in your new capacity as a Green, do you agree with Tony that this is just punishment for our nation's wanton destruction of our natural environment?
Tony is a man after my own heart. He lives in Cornwall. I live in Cornwall. He is clearly an environmentalist, as am I. And I think that really, it makes you realise, living in Cornwall, the absolute parlous state of our nation's infrastructure. It takes me about 6 hours to get into London when I come up every now and again. And there are certain parts of the country that have been systematically starved of infrastructure investment. That has been the case for a very long time. The north of England is one, the southwest is another. And instead, we prioritise constantly these catchy mega projects, which make politicians feel really good about themselves, rather than doing the very boring but hard work of connecting places that need to be connected to make people's lives easier and the economy run more effectively.
Lord Marland.
Well,
a lot of this is on
Grace and Tony are people of my own heart, except I don't live in Cornwall. I think it's the biggest scandal that the country has had from, as Emma says, from a infrastructure point of view. I agree with Luke, and the man I most agree with is Lord Berkeley, Tony Berkeley, who from the very beginning, who's the world expert on trains, as far as I'm concerned, was dead against it, and I totally agree with them. In fact, Number 10 asked me whether I'd be interested in being chairman of it, and I said, no, thank you very much. And that's the best decision I've made. Probably not for the country, but for myself. It's an absolute national scandal. But it does go, it's not just, it goes back, as Emma says, to people not in their own backyard, quite sensibly, quite reasonably, not wanting a train whistling through it. It goes back to terrible planning laws to deal with newts, to do with people being allowed to protest and sit protected. I know of an estate that the government spent £5 million on policing 20 protesters for 6 months. This sort of constant stream of bad management and lack of endeavour, and it is a national scandal. And I'm very pleased to hear that the Labour Party have come out and said we're not going to carry on with it beyond Birmingham. It's not going to make a lot of difference between here and Birmingham, something like 2.5 minutes. Emma quite rightly points to the fact that the north is where the infrastructure money should be spent, and various governments have said it's going to. I really want them to see this government do it and really improve, because that's where it's needed, as well, of course, travel to Cornwall.
But as the man who could have been the chairman of this thing...
Well, in your view, not in mine.
Not in yours, was the potential chairman of this thing. If it's not going to make that much difference, 2.5 minutes, as you say, between London and Birmingham, why not just stop spending the money now?
Exactly. I would have stopped it from the very beginning. I was a complete white elephant. It does, in theory, well, obviously it was going to bring a faster time up to Manchester, but the most important thing is to get a fast time from Manchester to Leeds. And I say that for Luke.
Or doing the TPE route upgrade. And
that's right, that's your constituency. You want to get home quickly, and you want to get to Manchester quickly for the next conference, and that's why it's important to have that rail link.
Well, and I've called for it to be called the Turing line as well. I think it's a huge legacy. If we get that electrification, extra capacity, more reliability, you know, that connection, if you compare the arc of Crossrail, it's very similar in terms of length. We're just absolutely historically bad as a nation at investing in these major infrastructure projects, and we have said no more. We're investing in the spending review, 110 billion quid extra going into capital expenditure, but we're getting to grips with the planning laws that have been the big blockers for far too long through the planning and infrastructure bill. My constituents, those that are on the housing waiting list, they should have more rights than newts. I'm sorry.
OK, we're going to talk more about HS2 after the 9 o'clock news. We're going to spend the final hour of the programme talking more about HS2, so you can join that conversation at the top of the hour. There is more to come on Cross Question. The time now is 14 minutes to 9.
This is LBC.
And C's.
Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
We're getting a lot of love for Cornwall by text as a result of the conversation that we've been having on Cross Question so far. You can ask our panel questions by calling 0345 6060 973, or you can text 84850, or ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC, and your question will flash up on the screen in front of me. And it is through Alexa that we take our next question. It comes from Dave in Derby, who asks, do you think the grooming gangs inquiry, that of course was announced by the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper earlier in the week, will be one big massive cover-up, which will mean that people won't be held accountable for their actions? Emma Revell, is this going to be a big, massive cover-up? We know it's going to take 3 years for this national inquiry to conclude.
I don't think it'll be a cover-up, because I think cover-up implies ill intent, and I don't think that's the way that this is being entered into. I think what concerns me about this inquiry is that the scope of the grooming gangs issue is so broad and there are so many different facets to it that it would be very difficult to cover that in one inquiry. I think the temptation will be to narrow it to perhaps victims and perpetrators and racial sensitivities around the perpetrators, and exclude, say, police who didn't act, social workers who didn't act, or the elements of the conversation that need to be included. And then that will lead to accusations of a cover-up, not because that has been the intent, but I think the design of the inquiry is key. It needs to be very well thought out and very comprehensive, because unless we cover all of the different elements of the situation and cover them in a lot of depth, and with recommendations that are actually useful, because my secondary concern about inquiries in general, not just this one specifically, is they take a very long time, they're very expensive, they drag on for years and years. It may, 3 years is what's planned.
Average length. The average length is 3 years, I believe.
They may take much longer. And then at the end of it, nothing really changes. People go, oh, OK, that's fine, we'll just move on.
So Luke Charters, Labour MP for York Outer, is this inquiry going to be different?
Well, we're determined to get to the truth, to support victims in that way, and that's why the inquiry is going to be governed by the Inquiry Act. So it will have an independent chair, it will set its remit, and it will, of course, have that crucial power to compel evidence and compel witnesses. What I would say, though, is, and this is the clear message from victims, an inquiry, as you say, will take time. It's going to be thorough. It will get to the truth. But whilst that's ongoing, we've got to continue those important actions. There were 20 recommendations in Professor Alexis Jay report. We're going through some of those. We're already through the Children and Wellbeing in Schools Bill. We're bringing in, for example, registration around homeschooling. So we've got to bring in measures like the Child Protection Authority. We've got to crack on with those actions whilst the inquiry is going on as well.
Were you backing the National Inquiry previously, or did you shift with Keir Starmer?
Well, I've supported Baroness Casey conduct this rapid assessment of the National Review. That was the right approach. So now we're going to move to a process where we've got that Inquiry Act governing the next stage of that national inquiry.
Lord Marland, are you concerned, as Dave in Derby is, that this is going to be a massive cover-up that means people won't be held accountable for their actions?
Well, let's be fair, it has been a massive cover-up. Rotherham Council has covered it up. Yorkshire Council has covered it up. The police have covered it up. And it's been a massive cover-up, and the current government have not reacted quickly enough to the protests from it for I don't know whatever reason, but possibly because previous involvements. But it's an absolute disgrace. It's disgusting what's happened up there, and that's disgusting there's nothing been done about it. And we all know that an inquiry, as you rightly say, will take 3 years to come out with, and by that time we could have war in Iraq or Iran or somewhere else, and everyone will have forgotten about it and be pushed under the carpet. These sort of things have got to be dealt with when they're found out, and the people who cover it up are the ones who are the most guilty. They are disgraceful for doing this.
Grace?
People talk about cover-ups and conspiracies when they are deeply cynical about democracy. And it's hardly surprising that people are cynical about our democracy. Trust in political parties is at all-time lows. Trust in many of our democratic institutions has been steadily eroded with scandal after scandal after scandal. And it isn't surprising, because the issue here is a lack of accountability. It is that gap that exists between the people making the decisions and then people who are experiencing the results of those decisions. There needs to be genuine accountability. People want to be heard. They want to be listened to rather than ignored and marginalised, as many of the victims were in this case, and as many people have experience of when it comes to trying to appeal to politicians on a daily basis. That requires, yes, an inquiry, a very, very deep inquiry with proper engagement with the people in this community, but also a rethinking about the way that we do democracy so that people don't jump to assuming that everything's going to be a cover-up or a conspiracy, because they know that there is genuine accountability.
Okay, I want to get to one last question, and it comes on text from Ant in Lakenheath. And Ant says, food prices are rising, with economists saying it's Rachel Reeves' fault for raising national insurance contributions, which shops were always going to pass the cost of those contributions on to consumers. What's the logic for this policy? I'm assuming that Ant is referring to the policy of raising national insurance contributions, given that they are inflationary. And new inflation data today showed that food prices have risen for the last 3 months, with May's figure of 4.4%, the biggest rise in food prices since February of last year. Isn't inflation an inevitable result, Luke Charters, of the Chancellor's decision to raise national insurance contributions?
I think what I'd say is look at what the bosses of the supermarkets said after the UK-EU summit. The SPSS deal, so that we can reduce some of those red tape around food imports into the UK, that will have a deflationary impact on food prices. So the supermarket bosses, they're welcoming that deal with the UK and the EU to bring down food prices.
So when are people going to see that happen?
Well, of course, that's going to take time, but it's a positive signal. You had supermarket bosses queuing up to back that deal, Simon.
But fair to say that if you hadn't raised the national insurance contributions, the EU deal, that deal would result in food prices falling even further, wouldn't it?
Well, ultimately, we're putting more pounds in people's pockets. They're increasing the national living wage, £1,400 a year. And so people are, but even things like extending free school meals, £3 bus cap, all of these things are putting more pounds into people's pockets.
But do you concede that the raise in national insurance contributions was, as Ant is suggesting, inherently inflationary?
I think if we didn't get to grips with the situation that we had, we would not be able to invest in public services, the NHS, schools, and do all these things like increase free school meals availability. So we took those decisions to do things like increase free school meals provision.
Emma Revell.
Well, the question asked what the logic was behind increasing national insurance contributions. I don't know. You'd have to ask Rachel Reeves. I don't think there necessarily is logic to it.
Well, the Tories blew up the economy. £22 billion black hole.
We had Rachel Reeves come in to say they were on the side of business, and it was incredibly well received. Business thought that Labour were going to be on their side, and then they increased costs on businesses. And we saw even before the increase in national insurance contributions for employers came into effect, even once it was announced, business confidence started plummeting. It's never recovered. And business feels like they've lost the trust of government. Government felt like they were offering...
economy in the G7, 4 interest rates cuts. We had the record investment summit, £60 billion. You know, there are these positive signals. And I think we had to take those tough decisions. The Conservatives and Reform, they back the spending, but they don't back how it's paid for. And that is where the math simply doesn't add up.
Fastest growing economy in the G7. The world is wider than the G7, and that growth is not fast enough.
I don't want to talk Britain down. That is a record achievement, by the way.
It's a poor achievement. Just because it's better than other people doesn't make it good.
Economies.
The growth we need to sustain public spending, if we look at welfare over the next 50 years and the cost of an ageing society, we need growth of 2.7% every single year for the next 50 years. We are nowhere close. Nowhere close.
Lord Marland.
Well, of course, these are inflationary measures. Add to that the fact that you give the public sector anything from 15 to 20% pay rises, which naturally falls through to the private sector. You've got inflationary measures. We are going to have inflation. We're going to have higher interest rates. And this has been started by, I can't believe, I mean, they talk about a black hole. They've created a black hole even bigger than the Tories did. And, you know, I'm ashamed of that, by the way. But this is not good government policy, and it will catch them.
Grace Blakeley, what was the logic of this policy of raising national insurance contributions given the inherent inflationary results of them?
Well, I think it fits quite well with Rachel Reeves's logic, because when they say they're on the side of business, they basically mean they're on the side of the city and large corporations. They don't mean really that they're on the side of small businesses.
I don't know where you're getting this nonsense from. We've got the employment
well, I mean, who's been having meetings with Rachel Reeves? Who's been getting tax cuts? It's been private equity and non-doms that have been able to...
You said this earlier. I mean, we've closed the carried interest loophole.
No, you haven't. That was massively watered down, and the private equity lobbyists cast it as a massive victory for them. The same with the non-dom loophole as well. That's going to be reversed if reports from the city are to be believed. So look, I think, you know, this reflects that issue, which is that there is this imbalance in our economy, and it is an imbalance in our economy, not just in politics, between very big, powerful businesses and the smaller businesses that employ most people. Now, look, I disagree, actually. The incidence of this tax is not likely to be felt in terms of inflation. It's much more likely to be felt in terms of employment, because it is, remember, a tax that's linked to employees. So this is much more likely to lead to lower levels of employment. We're already finding ourselves in a situation where the future of the economy in terms of employment employment is very uncertain. Young people are facing a very uncertain jobs market. I don't think that this was actually a good tax. It would have been much better to tax profits, to tax the sectors of the economy that have far higher levels of profitability. And we come to issues around food prices, right? I mean, we really need to name the issue here that is causing inflation. It is firstly geopolitical instability, which is linked to, secondly, our ongoing reliance on fossil fuels, and linked to, thirdly, climate breakdown. Geopolitical instability, we saw oil prices spike recently. What do oil prices affect? The prices of fertilizers, which affect the prices of food. Also, the transportation costs of that food. And then we have the fact that there are going to be large places around the planet that currently are used to grow certain food commodities, which will not be able to do so in the immediate future. So if we want to tackle these issues around food prices, we need to have a world that is peaceful and living within our environmental limits.
OK, we're going to rattle through the fun question of the night as we close out this edition of Cross Question. It comes from Chris in Surrey, who says the first trailer of the film that will see Jeremy Allen White play Bruce Springsteen in a biopic of the boss has been released today. Who would you want to play you in a film about your life? I do note that Chris in Surrey does not make it clear whether the actor in question or actress in question needs to be living or not living. But who would you want to play you in a film about your life? Luke Charters.
Believe it or not, before I had a beard, because of my round glasses, people thought I looked like Daniel Radcliffe. So I'll take that as a younger version of myself.
That's very good. Emma?
I can't think of anyone who looks like me, and the only person who's from my neck of the woods is Sheridan Smith, but she's at least 10 years older than me, so I'm not sure that's be a massive compliment to me. Sure. But she's a very good actress, so I'll take it.
I'm sure they can do something in CGI.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dye your hair,
Grace.
should be fun.
I have been told that I look like an actress called Rashida Jones, who is in Parks and Recreations, and she seems pretty cool. So I'm going to say her.
Okay. Jonathan Marland.
A lot of people said I look like Paul Newman, but I know they're lying. So I think it's Peter Kay's.
I'm not going there. My thanks to the Cross Question panel this evening and to all of you for sending in your questions to the panel. Joining me around the table tonight, I had Luke Charters, the Labour Member of Parliament for York Outer, Lord Jonathan Marland, Conservative peer and former Minister, the Chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, promoting trade and investment across the Commonwealth, Grace Blakeley, the economist and political commentator and author of the book Venture Capitalism, and Emma Revell of the Centre for Policy's think tank, the Centre for Policy Studies think tank. That's Cross Question for this week. We're back on Monday with another edition of the panel, and Monday's panel will include the Labour peer, Baroness Luciana Berger, one of Emma's colleagues at the Centre for Policy Studies, its director Robert Colville, and the migrants' rights campaigner Zoe Gardner. So join us for that after the 8 o'clock news on LBC on Monday. Into our final hour together tonight, and we are going to talk about HS2. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander was talking about it earlier today.
It's an appalling mess, but it's one we will sort out.
But can she sort it out? It sounds like a very steep climb, as we've already been discussing on the programme. We learnt today there is no chance that any trains will run on HS2's high-speed tracks in time for the launch target of 2033. She could not estimate when service from London to Birmingham might start. And she said billions of pounds of taxpayer money, your money, has been wasted. She couldn't say how much the project will ultimately cost. Now, when you find yourself in a hole, generally it's a good idea to stop digging. Is it time to write the cash off and walk away from HS2, or should we soldier on? Because after all, we're the country that invented railways.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Donald Trump has said Iran wants to meet as the country continues to exchange rocket fire with Israel for a sixth day. The US president is holding a meeting on the conflict in the White House Situation Room. Speaking to reporters beforehand, he said he had ideas as to what to do when asked whether US forces would join Israeli strikes. Mr. Trump also repeated his claim that Iranian officials want to come to the White House.
We'll see what happens. We've got a ways to go. They